iwi.
Honourable Nick Smith.
Tato koutou. Can I acknowledge Tamati Kruger, the trustees and people of Tuhoe, and this landmark bill in the treaty settlement process. I want to make a little bit of comments about the settlement in the context of the history of treaty settlements, some comments about the conservation significance of the Ureweras and the settlement, and a little bit about the future. It is surprising for me as a Minister of Conservation in the 1990s that was involved under the leadership of the Right Honourable Jim Bolger, who's in the House, at the huge debate that occurred around the provisions of the Ngāi Tahu settlement in respect of conservation land and how far this country and this Parliament has come when we now get to this Tuhoe settlement in respect of the treasured Urewera National Park. If you had told me 15 years ago that Parliament would almost unanimously be able to agree to this bill, I would have said, "You're dreaming, mate." And it has been a real journey for New Zealand, for iwi and for Parliament to get used to the idea that Maori are perfectly capable of conserving New Zealand treasures at least as well as Pākehā and Departments of State. I want to also acknowledge in the history of that treaty settlement process, and I think, Minister Chris Finlayson, this is number 34, that you have progressed through this Parliament, but I'd actually say to you, I think this has been one of the most difficult because the history with Tuhoe is actually some of the most ugly chapters in the settlement history of New Zealand. And even when we were elected to government with the commitment of the Prime Minister and your energy that I acknowledge, Chris, as the Treaty Settlement Minister, you would have been an optimist in 2008 to think that we could get to this point with what I think is the most difficult of the treaty breaches that this Parliament is having to deal with. Can I note that the 213,000 hectares of the Ureweras is one of the very special conservation areas of New Zealand. It is the largest national park in the North Island. I note that in the treaty settlement process there is a desire to have World Heritage recognition of that area, something that I would welcome. I note that this is an area that has over 70,000 visitors a year. It is an area where over 5,000 people a year do that very special Great Walk of the Waikaremoana track and acknowledge that. The part for me that's a bit ironic in the debate that has occurred around national parks is that there's sort of been this view that Pākehā treasure to a greater degree New Zealand's natural heritage, and that, in my view, is actually the opposite of what has been true if we're honest about the history of New Zealand. Many of the settlers that came from Europe wanted to recreate in New Zealand the sort of English landscape rather than actually recognising the natural treasures. Even as Minister of Conservation of Pākehā Heritage, I note that there are literally thousands of species that only exist in New Zealand, whereas the United Kingdom, from many of us descend, has only one unique species, a rather boring Scottish rybird. And then I look at just the Ureweras, whether it be kiwi, kokako, whether it be the kaka, whether it be in terms of the huge beech and podocarp forests, it is truly a natural treasure. Now, in that discussion around, well, can iwi be trusted with managing those treasures, I say absolutely. And I say that the new board will do, in my view, equally as well a job of managing that treasure as any department might. There is in the conservation movement a view that only the state, only the government can do conservation well. And I'm pleased that this government has actually made some changes to the Department of Conservation for it to be more outward looking, for it to be not just involved in more partnerships with iwi, but also with business and with communities, because if we are truly to look after what makes these precious islands special, then it's not just up to departments of state, but partnering with community organisations. And I think the Urewera bill that we are passing today actually sets up a new framework in which to manage New Zealand's treasures. I want to finally comment about the future, because I am an optimist. I reflect back on when Tuhoe was the Minister of Maori Affairs and I was the Minister of Conservation in the 1990s. And the huge controversy over the visitor centre at Lake Waikaremoana in the tensions that existed over the very issue. And I'd like to not just acknowledge Tuhoe's work as the chair of the Select Committee on this bill, but say to Tuhoe as a retiring member, I look forward to travelling to Lake Waikaremoana and opening a new visitor centre on a site that's been determined by Tuhoe, and a design that's involved Tuhoe, and in a place of which Tuhoe and all New Zealanders can be proud. Mr. Speaker, this is a remarkable bill, a remarkable achievement, and we must acknowledge the courage of all of those that have been involved in getting this to the third reading stage, of which I particularly want to say it actually is the most courage for Tuhoe themselves, for where trust has previously been breached, to have the good faith to sit down with the Crown and to find a way forward, and this bill does just that.
I call the honourable member Tim